Okay. Hello, everybody. I think more people will join in the coming minutes, but we can start with a short introduction. Welcome to ENFASYS second webinar. The first one happened about a month ago, and it was about an introduction on the project and the project topic, while the second webinar is about ENFASYS early results coming from tour packages that have started early on in the project. You have seen probably already the agenda. Just to go through it fast, I will provide you a very short presentation of ENFASYS, and then the floor will be going to Robert from FEEBLE, discussing the framework that is enabling study of behavioral and systemic factors of food system transformation. So here we will discuss what a conceptual framework is and why we need it for the project ENFASYS, and how we conceptualize behavioral and systemic factors that influence food system transformation. This presentation will take about 10 minutes. I would just kindly ask everybody to mute in case they have some background noise. The second presentation will be provided by Clementine from UC Louvain, and it's going to be about policy space of ENFASYS case studies. Here it is based, of course, on case studies data reports, and she will summarize characteristics of policy spaces for case studies, showing influential policies, design levels, and instruments used, while highlighting contrasts between case studies policy spaces. Then the third presentation will also be delivered by Clementine, and it's going to be about value network maps of ENFASYS case studies. This is going to be an introduction of case studies using generic food system map and an explanation of the methodology of value network maps. Here we will provide key insights from the 10 in-depth case studies, and highlight commonalities and differences among them. Finally, the last presentation is going to be delivered by Robert from FEEBLE, and it's going to be about European transformation initiatives for sustainable food and the barriers that we have encountered. So here we conducted a review of more than 100 European initiatives aiming at transforming the food system. And we will provide you with some insights from this broad review study, and we'll put special emphasis on the barriers which these initiatives encounter on their transformation pathway. So I believe that all the presentation will be very insightful and interesting. The idea is that you can pose any questions on the chat during the presentation, and they will be answered at the end of the presentation, or at the end of each presentation, you can raise your hand and ask for a question directly. And we will monitor the chat. Finally, then we will conclude the webinar. As I said, very few details about the project. The project was funded under the topic Horizon CL6 2021 Farm to Fork 0108. It started on the 1st of September 2022. So yeah, we are now about a year and a half in the project. The project duration is 4 years, and it's coordinated by ILVO, a research institute from Belgium. And the budget is 4.5 million euros. The main project aims are to support the Green Deal, and in particular the Farm to Fork ambitions, to stimulate a just and robust transition to sustainable, productive, climate-neutral, biodiversity-friendly, and resilient farming systems, to strengthen the public strategies, especially the policies and private strategies with business models and social innovations that encourage farmers to change their production systems, and finally, to overcome the multiple lock-ins in current food systems that prevent farmers from moving to sustainable farming systems. And you will see how today's presentations are aligned to these aims and how they contribute to achieve them. We have 12 partners from 8 countries that you can see here. And today presentations will be delivered, as I said before, from UC Louvain and from FEEBLE. I wish you to enjoy this webinar and to ask questions to the presenters so that we can all contribute to greater knowledge.
No.
Thank you so much. Now we stop sharing and I will give the floor to Robert.
Hello. Do the technical things first.
Those are part of the agenda. Technical issues are always part of the webinar's technical.
Okay, can you see a PowerPoint slide?
No, we cannot see it right now.
You can't. That's not a good start. How do I do that? Like that, I guess. Can you see a PowerPoint slide now? Oh, wait, I have to click on that.
Yes, now we can see it, the conceptual framework.
Okay.
Thank you. The floor is yours.
I'm getting there. Unfortunately, I can't make it change.
There you go.
Yeah, no, it's working.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry about that. I kind of predicted that it was going to be a struggle for the first few seconds to make it work. But I trust now you can see a slide which says conceptual framework with my name on it. Yeah, I'm presenting this on behalf of the Feeble team. We were responsible for the work package 1 in ENFASYS, which was quite early in the project. The things we contracted to do were to create a conceptual framework and also do some systematic literature reviews, which were actually part of the conceptual framework, and to do what we call light touch reviews, which I'll talk about later on today. First question we need to think about, why isn't it changing, is why we need a conceptual framework in the first place. What are they for? The thing is that for every research project you have, or every action you take, there's always a conceptual framework. It's just sometimes you don't write it down. You always have some idea about how the world works or why you're doing what you're doing. And sometimes this is kind of self-evident. So you don't really need to articulate your conceptual framework, you just have it. This is even the case in things like grounded theory, which is supposed to not have a conceptual framework explicitly. You're supposed to take the data from your research and then build your framework from that. But I argue that we always have some explanation of how the world works. So we always have a kind of a starting point for interpreting our data, interpreting what we're creating with our data. But what conceptual frameworks are for is they're a way of breaking down something that's very, very abstract into manageable parts. And the ENFASYS project is about societal transformation. And it's hard to imagine anything more abstract than that. There's hugely nuanced, it's hugely complex. Every person is going to be able to see it in a different way. So with a conceptual framework, we can break it down into manageable parts. And inside these manageable parts, what we can do is start to look for some common understandings of the terms that we're talking about. And what the conceptual framework is going to do is going to guide us on what to focus on. And it's going to help us to interpret the data that we collect or the data that we're working with. Typically, the formulation of the conceptual framework is problem-driven. And in research, a problem-driven approach implies that what it does is it means that we have a certain lens through which in what we're investigating. And this lens is interpretive lens. And it's very useful for that, because if we have an interpretive lens and the conceptual framework gives us that, then basically we can interpret very many different kinds of data. So in a project such as ENFASYS, where there's a lot of case studies work going on in very, very different contexts, they've been specifically chosen to be very, very different from each other. What a conceptual framework does is it gives us a way of interpreting these in a way that's common to us, so that we can make sense of this vast amount of data that we're collecting. So it's not explanatory or predictive, but what it is it's a way of structuring our explanations. So it can correspond with explanations, but it's not explanatory. So essentially what it does is it guides what we focus on, and it guides how we interpret what comes out of this work. Inside the ENFASYS project, we made the choice to have a participatory process of developing the conceptual framework. This isn't always the way inside a project, even in multi-partner projects such as this one. A more common way of coming up with the conceptual framework is somebody just does it. Somebody goes along and looks at what theory seems to fit, proposes a framework and says, okay, this is it. But we decided that we're working with networks in the field, and we're being deliberately participatory in the work that we do with these people. So we're going to be asking that from the people we're working with in the field. It seems to be disingenuous, to not do the same thing for ourselves. So we decided to take a collaborative process, which started off by identifying initial notions and concepts, which we did early in the project. We started this off at the kickoff meeting of the project, and basically we collected the needs. We collected, okay, from the people who are going to be using a conceptual framework, which is the project partners. We said, okay, what do you want? What are you going to be using this for? Next step was to go and look at the literature. And inside the project, we did these 4 systematic literature reviews, which is very easy and quick to say, but it's actually quite a lot of work. There are a lot of people involved from several different organizations, partner organizations in the project, to look at system dynamics, behavior, business, and governance, and to do reasonably thorough literature reviews on how these domains intersect with this concept of societal transformation. Then we combined these and then took the results of this to a workshop at the Paris General Assembly of the ENFASYS project. Took it back to the partners who are supposed to be going to use our conceptual framework and said, look, what do you think? So we did a feedback round and then brought all this together and came up with the kind of final result of the conceptual framework that we intended to use. What our constraints was that it had to be sufficiently broad to accommodate this very, very broad range of cases, which had been, as I said before, explicitly chosen to be as broad as possible. But it also had to be specific enough to be useful for the collaboration, so that when we apply it to one case study or one part of the work in the ENFASYS project, then we produce something which is comparable or at least able to be connected with other parts. So we're faced with the situation that it has to be broad and specific at the same time. So yeah, and that's what I was aiming for, and that was one of the reasons why we thought it was a very good idea to keep on bringing it back to the project partners and saying, okay, is this useful for you? Is this sufficiently specific that it's useful for you? And we took care of the broadness to try and make sure that whatever came in was able to be comparable. So in that way, even though the participatory process, the collaborative process of creating a conceptual framework is time consuming and sometimes frustrating and sometimes annoying for everybody, it's worth it. It's worth to go through this pain barrier to come up with something that's kind of useful for everybody. Yeah, so when creating it, one of the very early questions we had was to talk about what type of transition are we actually talking about? Are we talking about transition or transformation? And the starting point for that was that it should be a just and robust transition. Yeah, there's a whole lot of different ways you can understand these terms, transition and transformation. Transformation is often perceived as being open-ended, It has a technical component of transformation, but also has a society-based component of transformation. Transition is often, but not always, steered. Transition can also be open-ended, can also be society-based and technical. So there were a lot of open questions about that. And to kind of help us navigate through these open questions, we used this classification of transformation concepts, which came from Fiola, which basically sets them out on a quadrant with the poles being prescriptive or descriptive, and the outer poles are emergent and deliberate, which was a good way of organizing these notions of processes of change. But we found that we were in several quadrants inside this diagram at the same time. And sometimes we're talking about solution-oriented research, which is prescriptive and also deliberate. But other times we're talking with this collaborative component of the project, or participative component, then we're suddenly talking about emergent. So emergent certainly had a place. So we had to be open to emergent propositions, but at the same time, we had to have a robust analytical basis. And the way we did that was by linking knowledge to action and co-designing these processes. And another issue we were faced with is how to link behaviors, because we have behavioral factors can be individual behaviors, but they can also be systemic behavioral factors. So they can be within a person or an organization, or systemic. And the way we chose to link these was using the multi-level perspective, which I think most of us are familiar with from Giels. And it proved useful. It proved a useful way of thinking about the systemic and the behavioral factors, talking about how innovations can become mainstream. But what it didn't really help us out with very much was the process. So what makes these little arrows fly and become mainstream? And yeah, at the practical level, that meant that we need to consider inter-transdisciplinary research. What that meant was that we started to think about these three types of knowledge: system knowledge, target knowledge, and transformation knowledge. The system knowledge, the what is part, was very useful for us for accommodating the different disciplinary backgrounds inside the project. And indeed, this three types of knowledge comes from the transdisciplinary way of thinking. The system knowledge allows us to work in our disciplinary traditions and come up with some kind of comparable meeting point from the disciplines that we bring. We also need to interpret this, and we do that. Or the result of this interpretation is to come up with target knowledge. That's what do we want? Where do we go? What can we do with this knowledge that we have? And what transformation knowledge is about the process. It's about how we get there, how we get to these goals that we're talking about. And all of this, deliberation and discussion and feedback rounds and desk research and literature reviews, brought us to the actual conceptual framework that we settled upon to guide our interpretation, and also to give us direction and guidance about what we focus on. And just to walk through the diagram, on the sides of the diagram, we've got these behavioural factors and the systemic factors. That, as I was saying before, we brought these together, we link them through the multi-level perspective, which is the orange section at the top of the diagram. And the multi-level perspective, to operationalize that, to think about the motor or the engine for how innovations go from niche to mainstream, Then we were talking about these types of knowledge, the 3 types of knowledge to create change: system, target, and transformation knowledge. We propose that these lead to interventions or recommendations for interventions, at least, which can be public and private. And this is the mechanism that we're talking about for mainstreaming these interventions, or mainstreaming the initiatives. And these interventions, along with the behavioural factors and the systemic factors, with these feedback loops built in, lead to at least the potential for making changes towards sustainable farming systems. And that's what the whole purpose of this exercise was about. And with that, I'm done.
Thank you, Robert, very much. Yeah, I don't see questions in the chat, and I don't see raised hands. Is there anybody that would like to ask something to Robert? If not, then we can move to the next presentation from Clementine.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Clementine. You see your presentation?
Not yet?
Yes, yes, we can see it, yes.
Okay. But you don't have full screen sharing, right?
I don't see it in full screen. I see it.
Let's see if it works out. Is that fine now?
Yes, now we can see it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So hello, everybody. I'm going to present some results of the task 2.1, which was a big work of data collection, mainly implemented by the case study coordinators in the project. I mainly provided a framework for data collection, and then I aggregated all the results, and you will see what we can observe when we take a look at the 10 case studies together. So the focus today, excuse me, is mostly the policy spaces. So that is like the policy context in which case studies operate. Second, I want to show you all the types of actors that are included or related to the case studies. And then finally, I will show a few value network maps that were created by case study coordinators. And I will provide an analysis of the differences and the commonalities between case studies. Yes, so regarding the policy spaces, all the data comes from the desktop review, the experts interviews in some cases, and the actors interviews that were done by case study coordinators in the beginning of the process. And we asked them to list relevant policies in each case study. So this can be policies that that generate a certain context to the case study, or that directly impact the actors of the case study. And for each of those policies, we ask some details. So not only the name and the aim of the policy, but also which policy bodies have designed this policy and are in charge of rolling it out. What types of instruments are involved, at which level they were designed, and what is the influence of that policy on the case study. When we take the data from the 10 case studies together, we get 120 policies. So within these 120 policies, we identify policies, mainly policies that are at the EU level, at the national level, and at the regional level. And there is also a small share of policies at the international level. That's mostly, yeah, that's from case studies who have a quite wide scope and long value chains. And then there are also a few policies at the local level. But overall, you see that case studies are really, yeah, embedded into a network of policies. So that's definitely an important aspect to look at when we discuss the transition process within these case studies. Here you have the same repartition, but case study by case study. And I mostly, yeah, wanted to show it to highlight that some case studies are kind of more local, and thus they are influenced by local or regional policies mainly by those. And some case studies which are framed at a wider scale then are influenced by policies that are designed at a wider scale. We can also observe that there are always different levels of the policies. So that's also important because it means the actors are not only interconnected where they operate, but they're also interconnected to policy levels more widely than that. We also ask about the types of instruments within those policies, and the categories that we listed were whether it was administrative-based instruments, market-based instruments, knowledge-based instruments, or it could also be like strategic plans or guidelines and standards. And we have some kind of a nice repartition of those different instruments, except that we can notice that knowledge-based instruments are somehow a smaller share compared to administrative-based instruments and market-based instruments. And this is an important information that we will discuss at the end of the presentation. Because I will show other results that are kind of questioning this. So again, here you have the same data, but case study per case study. And again, here it's quite contrasted with like knowledge-based policies, policy instruments not being present in every case study. While like market-based instruments, we find them in every case study, and admin-based are quite common as well. Yeah, on the bottom, you also see the number of instruments that were listed. So it's also important to notice that depending on the case study framing, the number of policies we look at is quite different. It goes up to more than 30 policies influencing the case study, or 2, 3, 6, 9, 10. Yeah, so just as a little wrap up of this part, we see that case studies are embedded into a thick net of policies. This, I think it's quite clear. There is a significant variation across case studies. This I already mentioned, both in the number of policies, but also in the types of instruments implemented. And yeah, it's both a result of the framing of the case studies, because some case studies, I told you, are quite local, while some other have a quite wide scale. And it's also due to the framing in the sense that some case studies focus on policy design, while others focus on practical change. So this is like all the framing aspects. And then there is what is about the context itself, that between different countries or different regions or different sectors, there can indeed be differences in the policy space. So we cannot completely separate these two factors, but because we know about the framing is defined and more precisely defined, I would say. We can discuss, at least we can discuss the differences in the actual context of the case studies. Yeah, so this was the overview about the policy space. And to continue, I wanted to give you a bit more of an analysis of where are those case studies if we look at the food system in general. So first, here you have the covering in terms of the types of actors that were listed in the case studies as part of the network, the actors network, and we have this beautiful covering, I think, of actors of the food systems. So it goes from upstream actors, companies that provide like inputs, also of course farmers and advisory services are included in the second category. Then we have all that is in the value chain with collectors, logistics, processing actors, distribution and marketing. Consumers are of course also included, although it's not the focus of the project. Civil society and NGOs, and again, a large share is public sector, which makes sense with the number of policies that were listed. And we also have research organizations and education. Again, education is somehow a small share compared to the other types of actors. So this is in terms of repartition. You also have it here, case study per case study, and it's quite contrasted when we compare case studies. Here it's mainly due to the framing and the focus of the case studies. So when the case study has a value chain focus, of course, all those like distribution and processing and collecting actors will be included. Otherwise, not in general. The share of the public sector is quite varied across case studies, and again, this is whether there is kind of a focus on the policy level or the practical implementation level. Yeah, but you see that in each case study there is a range, there is a combination of a diversity of actors. So if we have kind of a generic food system map that I drafted here, in the middle you have a classical simplified value chain with farmers and then collecting and processing and retailers and consumers, and around you have all the actors that are kind of in the landscape. So public institutions, input providers, the same categories that I presented before. And this is just a generic map on which I want to show you where the case studies are located. So case study 1 and case study 3 are specifically looking at what farmers implement in relation to how policies are designed. Case study 2, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10 have kind of a sector level framing. And case study 7 and 8 will look at a specific value chain in a specific region. Yeah, so this is so like this is important to then interpret the data correctly. So you had more of a list of the actors, but case study coordinators also not only listed the actors, but introduced them into a value network map. So the sources are the same as previously. And in the value network map, the actors are represented in different spots. And what is the additional information here is that the flows between actors are also identified. So in the methodology that we used, there are 4 types of flows, or 4 flows are separated into 4 types. So there are knowledge flows, financial capital flows, commodities flows, and hierarchy and laws flows. And you will see that we can observe different phenomenon when we have these beautiful value network maps. Here, just to give an idea of what it looks like when you receive 10 value network maps made by different case study coordinators. It's quite rich. There is a lot of data. And I want to quickly present you 2 things that we can do out of these value network maps. So first, we can use the value network maps as a visualization tool. That is, thanks to the map, we can look at the flows, and we can look at what types of flows are there and where are they located on the map, and like how interconnected are they. And I wanted to show you 2 ways to do the value network maps, because I think it's quite interesting. So here from case study 2, you have a multi-stakeholder perspective for the value map. Like every actor is on the same level, very horizontal, and we see where the actors are and what types of flow are connecting them. This one is from case study 3. It's quite similar. And then there is also the possibility to organize the map around a specific type of actor. So here already from case study 4, it's kind of easy to read what are the flows that come to and go from farmers. And then to read like how are other actors related to the farmers? How is the system organized around the farmers? And I think it's even more explicit in this map from case study 8, where the cooperative that they look at is really in the center, and all the arrows are organized around it. So this was really like how value network maps can be used as a visualization tool, which is already very, very useful to know what we're talking about, and to help actors be aware of where they are located in the system. And then the second possibilities is to use value network maps as more as an assessment tool. And here I found like two ways two concepts that we could use for that. So first we can observe the degree of density of the map. So how much are actors interconnected? Is there only one arrow between each actor, between each pair of actors? Or are there a lot of arrows? So we can observe the density of the map, and the density is different from one case study to another. And second, we can also observe like if the different types of flows are interconnected or not. So when there is a knowledge transfer, is there also a financial capital transfer, or is it like separated between different actors and different spaces in the map? So that would be the second concept that I called flows integration, the degree of flows integration. So these are the results of this assessment. I don't want to go too much in details into the figures, but more to give you an idea of like a few things that we can observe and that I think are important. So if you look at the third section, flows, diversity, and weight. You can see that the share of knowledge flows is really high. We have one exception, but it can go up to more than 50%. So this is one fact that we must underline. And in terms of flows integration in the fourth section, you can observe that in most cases, lots of the arrows are with only one type of flow, and there are mostly 20%, sometimes a bit less, a bit more, of arrows that combine different types of flows. So this means that the level of flows integration is not really high. Here you have the same data about the different the weight of each type of flow. So as I already underlined, the share of knowledge flows is quite high. There is some kind of balance between financial and hierarchy flows. We observe it in every case study. And the share of commodity flows, it's not much, and it varies across case studies. And I would say it's mostly related to the framing of the case studies. But still, it's important to notice that we are talking about agricultural value chains, but the main types of flows are not commodities. So it means that actors are interconnected by other types of flows, and that to think the transition of agricultural and food systems, we must really look at those other flows. Yeah, so a little wrap up again of the key learnings. Many actors, many flows. We are looking at complexity. Knowledge represents a large share of the flows, and if you remember well, when we looked at the policy space, there were only a small percentage of the policy instruments that were focused on knowledge. So we have a contrast there. And finally, about this this low level of flows integration, we can think that there is a risk of inefficiency or inconsistency between the technical needs and the financial needs, or the services versus the knowledge available, just because those are spread across different actors and different areas of the maps. Yeah, so I think it gives an overview of the different case studies and what we can already learn from all this data.
Thank you very much, Clementine. It was indeed a very insightful presentation. It provided a lot of data that could be useful also for the upcoming work in ENFASYS for sure. Yeah, I see one question from Clara. I think you can also see it
Yes.
on your screen.
Yes, there are examples. An administrative-based instrument could be simply administrative, like simplification of administrative duties to access subsidies. It can also be opportunities for farmers to get support for their administrative work. It can also be a reorganization of the policy space so that there is more closeness between farmers and policy bodies where they can ask questions and get subsidies from. So that would be like some examples of admin-based instruments. Strategic, I think it's you are referring to strategic planning. So this is mostly like national plans where general goals are set around a specific topic. And in strategic planning mostly don't come with specific measures and figures of how much should be achieved, but it gives directions. And third, knowledge-based instruments could be, for example, when there is more funding for advisory services to provide knowledge to farmers, or funding of farmers groups, or knowledge development. So that would be this kind of support.
Thank you. I think your answer indeed addresses fully the question. I don't see other questions on the chat, and yeah, okay. Clara wrote thank you. So now I don't see any other questions, so we can move to the last presentation from Robert. Thank you again, Clementine, and Robert, the floor is yours.
You think I would have learnt this by now? Get in there. Can you see a presentation?
We do, yes.
Excellent. Yeah, in the first presentation at the beginning of the webinar, I said that we did what we call a light touch review of initiatives. So similar to the case studies that Clementine has just been talking about, we thought, yeah, okay, if having a really deep look at these case studies, we get to know a lot about them, but we don't get very much information about whether they are typical, whether they're common, whether they are in some way unique or special. And to kind of get an idea of that, we thought it would be a good idea to have a look at a larger number of similar case studies across Europe, or case studies on the same themes anyway. So we came up with this idea of what we call a light touch review. And yeah, the idea of that was to have a look at a few more. But the light touch part of it means that we do it quicker with less data, but just to get an idea about what's going on. So the aim of it was to provide partners with tools to enable the mapping of barriers, interventions, and transition pathways by reviewing a broad selection of transformation initiatives. Yeah, that's essentially what I just said, was just to give the project partners a way of locating their case studies into a kind of a broad landscape of initiatives, transformation initiatives that might be out there. Another aim of it was to give a systematic approach to case selection. And we call it the traditional case study research. And the way that usually works is people choose a case that they're going to study for reasons which are sometimes not very scientific. You're almost always going to choose a case which is near where you live. So yeah, near to my house is not a very scientific reason for choosing a case study, but this is the common way it's done. Usually you're going to choose, or often you're going to choose a case study because you know somebody in it, or you know something about it already. And what we wanted to do was to reflect on that and think, okay, if we choose a larger sample of case studies, in our case 101 case studies from across Europe, would we still choose the same case study for our in-depth research? The answer to that is almost always going to be yes, because they've been chosen for a reason. They've been chosen because you as a researcher know a lot about them, and you know that it's a very good one to study. But we just wanted to reflect on that and just to be systematic in the choice of these case studies. So practically what we did was took 101 case studies, which we found across Europe. We started off with a long list, a much longer list, and then chose a shorter list to look at in more depth. And these were chosen to be diverse in relation to their level, their mode, and their scope. The way we went about it specifically for each individual case was a desk study to gather the basic information about it, carry the key characteristics, and also thinking a little bit about, from the desk study, about the potential impact at the farming level. And then the primary data collection part was a one phone call interview. So a phone call which typically was about an hour to get some basic information and to ask some specific questions related to the project. If you collect a lot of data in an hour, in a 1 hour interview, you end up with a lot of information. And if you multiply this 1 hour interview by 101 times, you end up with a very large data set very, very quickly. So a way of processing that was to do a preliminary analysis, which was by asking the people who actually did the interviews and did the desk study to answer some questions about their interpretations of it. And then the more thorough analysis of it was to take the full data set, the transcripts of all of these interviews, and the interpretation which came from the partners who actually did the work, and then to pretty much do an analysis of the content of that. And to help us with that, we used an online artificial intelligence tool to help with summarizing the data. We had up over 1,000 pages of data to summarize. We were quite careful with that because we're not very used to working with artificial intelligence-based online tools. So we would, at the beginning especially, we did quite a lot of cross-checking. So we would take the summary of a section of data, and then as a team, 3 or 4 of us would sit down and look and say, okay, is this summary an accurate summary of the data that we're summarizing? And then afterwards, we would just do spot checks periodically. We just take a section that we've just asked the AI tool to summarize, and then just do a manual human check. The good news is that it was quite efficient and quite thorough at summarizing. We didn't find any occurrences where we felt the need to reject the summaries which came from these online tools. As I said before, one of the things that we were using the light touch review for was to come up with some questions that we might want to ask in the in-depth reviews, and also to come up with some kind of categorizations of the light touch review cases. One of the things we looked at was looking at the aims of the cases. And Rebecca has gone and made a word cloud for us. And we can see that the word food was the one which came up the most often. Organic farming, sustainable agriculture, farmers, things like that. Yeah, we found this to be useful just for getting an idea about what we were looking at. And from this, we could come up with some categories to structure some questions for the in-depth case studies. Challenges that the initiatives face. We were also very interested in categorizing these. The left-hand column are the greatest challenges, and the secondary challenges are in the right-hand column. So challenges they face are environmental change, climate, technical constraints, organizational hurdles, funding questions, stakeholder engagement, bureaucracy. An example of an environmental change, a quote which came from the results itself, was that various unpredictable factors such as social unrest, natural disasters, and so on, can impact their projects significantly. You can see why we categorise that the way we did. Keeping coordination groups and producers together despite technical difficulties. Funding was mentioned often by many. Initiatives all need money. Very few of them said that they have plenty. So funding and searching for funding is a common activity for them that really dominates. Nowadays people are busy. Getting people to engage, especially if the engagement is voluntary, is difficult. It's a challenge that's faced by many initiatives. And from all this, we came up with some characteristics which are common through many of the initiatives that we looked at. Characteristics which enable them to achieve their transformation goals. Supportive policy and regulatory frameworks are important. A degree of autonomy is also strong. The people who know what actions to take are the people on the ground doing these initiatives. One of the challenges that they faced was the funding bodies would often want to have an influence of what they do, of course. I mean, if you're paying the money, then you have an influence, you're interested in having influence of what people actually do with your money. But funding bodies which trust and give the initiatives a high degree of autonomy tend to result in the initiatives being more successful. Community support is hugely important. Working together, collaboration and collective efforts, also very important. And also the scope. Initiatives which set their goals high, which aimed for big, tended to have more success in their transformation activities. So the conclusion is that transformation initiatives need an environment that encourages innovation, helps them with the unpredictable factors, and also perhaps helps them with acquisition of funds. They need an environment that promotes a high degree of autonomy, sometimes with less bureaucracy, but also with strong community support. They need an environment that promotes collaboration and transdisciplinarity, which is an internal environment. and they need an environment which supports research and development. And with that, I'm done again. That was quite fast.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, we are perfectly in time. It's 12. Yes, thank you everybody for joining. I don't see any other question on the chat. The last one we have been able to, I think, address it via text. If there is anybody that would like to ask some questions, please raise your hand now, and we can have still a few minutes to discuss. Otherwise, I also understand that the time slot for this webinar is finished and people may jump in other calls. Generally speaking, I would like to thank the presenters, Robert and Clementine. I think you did an excellent job, and I hope that their presentation have been very useful to you. You can reach us through social media or also by email that you can find on the website, as I already mentioned at the beginning. And thank you everybody for joining, and looking forward to have you at the next webinar.
Before we break out, Catherine has her hand up.
I don't see it. I don't know why.
Thanks. Yeah, are you okay for me to come in?
Sorry. Yeah, please, Catherine.
I'll turn my video on as well. Hi. Thanks for that. That was super interesting. I was trying to look across which case study, etc. So that's why my question in the chat. But the other thing I found really interesting is that you used policies and regulation as a flow, that to capture that as a flow, as a sort of directional thing. And I see that if it's a hierarchical, a regulation or a law. I was wondering why is that not part of your framework as a given, but seen as something that is a flow, like commodities of finance or knowledge, where I can see that flow characteristic much clearer.
I guess the question is for me. I think it's a given that there is a policy space, and that's what I presented first. And then in the value network maps, it's really like specific policies that that are directed to specific actors. So I think that's why we captured that as an arrow.
That's sort of meant to evoke a certain reaction, compliance, or something like that. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Is that part of an existing sort of theory or framework, or is that a decision that you debated within?
No, we used the methodology that an existing methodology.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Any other raised hands that I cannot see for some reason? I don't think so. Okay, I included in the chat also the link to our website for anybody that would like to contact us. And again, looking forward to see you in our next webinar that will be happening in the mid-May, where we will present more in details for case studies and their identified barriers. So thank you again. Have a great day, and looking forward to see you in our next webinar.
Thank you so much for organizing this. Much appreciated. Thanks for the invitation.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
bye.
much.